Chicago, Illinois, October 1935. The rain hammered against the cobblestones of Southside Chicago like 1,000 angry fists, turning the alleyways into rivers of filth and desperation. The city was drowning, not just in water, but in blood, bootleg whiskey, and the iron grip of organized crime. This was the America that Prohibition had built, a kingdom of shadows where the Mafia ruled with brass knuckles and Thompson submachine guns, and where human life was cheaper than a shot of illegal gin. In the heart of this darkness there existed a legend, a nightmare, a ghost story whispered in speakeasies and gambling dens across the city. They called him the White Death. His real name was Victor Krause, so few knew it, and fewer still dared to speak it aloud. The warehouse. 11:47 p.m. The abandoned meatpacking warehouse on Halsted Street stood like a tombstone against the Chicago skyline. Its windows were boarded, its walls stained with decades of industrial rust and recent violence. Inside, the air was thick with a smell of decay, motor oil, and fear. Victor Krause sat on a wooden crate in the corner of the vast, empty space, his massive frame making the industrial furniture look like children's toys. At 210 meters tall, he was a giant among men, but it wasn't just his height that made people recoil in terror. His skin was pale as fresh snow, his hair white as bleached bone, and his eyes held that unsettling pink-red tint that marked him as an albino. In the dim light of the single hanging bulb, he looked less like a man and more like a specter, something that shouldn't exist in the natural world. He was reading a battered copy of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, published just 2 years earlier. The pages were worn, the spine cracked from repeated readings. His enormous hands that had broken necks and crushed windpipes, held the book with surprising gentleness, as if it were made of glass. The door burst open with a crash that echoed through the warehouse like a gunshot. "Put the book down, freak, we got work." 3 men entered. The speaker was Danny Knuckles Romano, a stocky enforcer with a face like a clenched fist and a permanent sneer. Behind him came 2 others, Johnny Terranova and Mickey the Rat Sullivan, both low-level soldiers in the Moretti family organization. Victor slowly closed his book, marking his place with a strip of torn newspaper. He didn't look at the men. He never made eye contact unless absolutely necessary. Eye contact made people remember. Eye contact made the nightmares worse. For them, not for him. "Boss wants you downtown," Knuckles continued, lighting a cigarette with a silver lighter. "We got a problem, needs your special touch." Victor stood, and the 3 men instinctively took a step backward. They couldn't help it. Even after years of working alongside him, the sheer presence of Victor Krause triggered something primal in the human brain, the ancient instinct that screamed predator when confronted with something bigger, stranger, more dangerous than yourself. "Who?" Victor's voice was deep, quiet, like distant thunder. He spoke rarely, and never more than necessary. "Some punk named Castellano, been skimming from the numbers racket in Little Italy. Thinks he's smart, thinks he can steal from Mr. Moretti and walk away." Knuckles grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "You're gonna show him different." Victor reached for his coat, a massive black overcoat specially tailored to fit his frame. It had cost Salvatore Moretti $300, a small fortune in 1935. But Moretti understood presentation. Victor Krause wasn't just an enforcer. He was a message. He was fear made flesh. The drive, 12:15 am. They drove through the rain-slicked streets in a black 1934 Cadillac Vi-16, the kind of car that screamed money and power. Victor sat in the back, his head nearly touching the roof, even with the seat pushed all the way back. The city passed by the windows like a fever dream, neon signs advertising illegal booze, desperate faces huddled in doorways, police officers who looked the other way because they were on Moretti's payroll. Johnny Terranova kept glancing at Victor in the rearview mirror, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "You ever wonder why you look like that?" Johnny asked suddenly, his voice cracking slightly. "I mean, what are the odds? You being so different and so big. It's like God made you special for this work." "Shut up, Johnny," Knuckles muttered from the passenger seat. But Johnny couldn't stop. Fear made him talk. "I'm just saying it's like destiny or something. Like you were born to do what you do. Born to be." "I said shut up." Knuckles turned and slapped Johnny across the back of the head. Victor said nothing. He stared out the window at the rain. "Born to do what you do." The words echoed in his mind like a curse. Was that true? Had he been born for this? To be a monster? To be the thing that other monsters use to frighten their enemies? He couldn't remember much of his childhood. The memories were fragments, pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. He remembered cold. He remembered hunger. He remembered a woman's voice singing something in a language he didn't understand. And then nothing. Just darkness. And then the orphanage. St. Michael's Home for Unwanted Children, they'd called it. Unwanted. Even the name was honest about what they were. Throwaways. Forgotten. Invisible. Except Victor could never be invisible. Not looking like this. The kill. 12:43 am. The Castellano apartment was on the 3rd floor of a tenement building that leaned slightly to the left, as if exhausted by the weight of all the broken dreams it contained. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage, cheap tobacco, and desperation. Knuckles kicked the door open without bothering to knock. Home delivery, courtesy of Mr. Moretti. The apartment was small, cramped, lit by a single lamp with a stained yellow shade. Anthony Castellano stood near the window, a thin man in his late 30s with the eyes of a cornered animal. He'd been expecting them. You always knew when they were coming. "Please," Castellano whispered, his voice breaking. "Please, I got a family. I got 2 kids. I can pay it back. Every cent. I swear on my mother's grave I can pay it back." Knuckles laughed. "Your mother's grave? That's funny, Tony. Real funny, because you're about to join her." That's when Victor entered. He had to duck to fit through the doorway, his white hair nearly brushing the ceiling. The lamplight made his pale skin seem to glow, made his eyes look like pools of blood. Anthony Castellano made a sound. Not quite a scream, not quite a sob. It was the sound a man makes when he realizes he's looking at his own death. "Oh God. Oh Jesus. Not him. Please, not him." Victor stood there. Silent, massive, inevitable. This was the routine. He didn't have to do anything yet. His presence was enough. The reputation, the stories, the legend of the White Death, they did half the work before he ever laid a hand on anyone. "You know the rules, Tony," Knuckles said, his voice almost cheerful. "You steal from the family takes from you, and what the family's taking tonight is your life." "My kids," Castellano sobbed, "they're sleeping in the next room. My wife is visiting her sister. Please don't let them hear. Don't let them." "Victor," Knuckles nodded. "Make it quick. We got 3 more stops tonight." Victor moved forward. Each step was heavy, deliberate. Castellano backed against the wall, his legs giving out, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor, hands raised in futile defense. Victor's hands reached out, those massive, pale hands that had ended so many lives. He could do it in seconds. A twist, a snap. It would be over before Castellano even had time to scream. The children in the next room would never wake. They'd find their father in the morning and their lives would be destroyed, but they wouldn't have this moment burned into their memories forever. Wasn't that mercy, in a way? Quick, clean, professional. Victor's hands closed around Castellano's throat and stopped. For the first time in 3 years, Victor Kraus hesitated. The memory. Something in Castellano's face triggered it. A memory. Sharp and sudden as a knife blade. A fragment of that lost childhood. A man's face. Kind eyes. A gentle smile. "It's okay, Victor. You're safe now. You're safe with us." Who was that man? Father? Uncle? Someone who'd cared? And then other faces. Hard faces. Men in dark suits. "The kid's perfect. Look at him. He's a freak. People will pay good money to see a freak like this." "No, not a circus. Something else. Somewhere else. Mr. Moretti wants him. The boss thinks the kid's got potential." Screaming. A woman screaming. Gunshots. "Forget what you remember, boy. You got no past. You got no family. You belong to us now." Victor blinked. The memory dissolved like smoke. He was back in the tenement. Hands around Castellano's throat, the man's pulse racing beneath his fingers. "What are you waiting for?" Knuckles demanded. "Do it." Victor looked down at Castellano. Really looked at him. Saw the terror, yes, but also saw something else. A wedding ring. Calloused hands, a working man, dirt under the fingernails. This wasn't a gangster. This was just someone desperate. Someone who'd made a mistake. Someone with children sleeping in the next room who would wake up tomorrow without a father. How many children had Victor orphaned? How many families had he destroyed? He'd never asked that question before. Never allowed himself to think about it. Why was he thinking about it now? "Victor!" Knuckles' voice was sharp with anger and confusion. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Victor released Castellano, stepping back. The man collapsed, gasping, sobbing, "Alive." "I can't," Victor said quietly. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Knuckles' face went from confusion to fury to fear in the space of 3 seconds. "You can't? What do you mean you can't? The boss gave an order. Tell Mr. Moretti." Victor paused, choosing his words carefully. "Tell him Castellano is dead. Tell him I dumped the body in the river." "Are you insane?" Johnny Terranova had gone pale. "You think Moretti won't find out? You think he won't hear about this?" Victor turned to face them, and for the first time, the 3 enforcers saw something in his eyes they'd never seen before. Not obedience, not emptiness, but something dangerous, something human. "Tell him what I said. Castellano is dead." He walked out of the apartment, ducking through the doorway, leaving 3 stunned mobsters and 1 sobbing, living man behind. The warehouse, 2:17 a.m. Victor returned to his corner of the warehouse, to his wooden crate and his battered book. But he couldn't read. The words blurred on the page. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from something else. Something he couldn't name. For 3 years he'd been the White Death, the monster, the nightmare. He'd done terrible things because he'd been told to, because he'd had nowhere else to go, because he'd believed he was exactly what they said he was. A freak, a tool, something born to do violence. But tonight, something had cracked. Some wall inside him had developed a fissure, and through that crack a question had emerged. What if they're wrong? What if I'm not a monster? What if I'm just a man who's been turned into one? In the corner of the warehouse, curled up on a pile of old newspapers, a stray cat mewed softly. Victor had been feeding it for weeks, leaving scraps of food he saved from his own meals. The cat had been afraid of him at first. Everything was afraid of him at first, but slowly, over time, it had learned that despite his appearance, despite his reputation, he meant no harm. If a cat could learn that, maybe others could too. Maybe he could learn it himself. Victor reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of dried meat. He tossed it gently toward the cat. The animal crept forward, snatched the food, and retreated to safety. But this time, it didn't run far. It sat just a few feet away, watching him with green eyes that held no fear. For the first time in 3 years, Victor Kraus smiled. It didn't last long. The warehouse door opened again, and this time it wasn't 3 enforcers. It was Salvatore Moretti himself. The boss of the Chicago outfit was a small man, barely 5'6", but he carried himself like a king. His suit was Italian silk, his shoes hand-cobbled leather, his hair pomaded and perfectly in place despite the rain. He was flanked by 6 armed men, and his face wore an expression that Victor had seen before: disappointment and something worse, betrayal. "Victor," Moretti said softly, his voice carrying across the empty warehouse, "we need to talk about what happened tonight." Victor stood slowly, setting his book aside. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. Moretti walked closer, his shoes clicking on the concrete floor. 3 years, Victor. 3 years I've taken care of you, fed you, clothed you, given you purpose, given you a place in this world when you had nothing. And this is how you repay me? By disobeying a direct order? The man had children, Victor said quietly. The man stole from me. Moretti's voice cracked like a whip. He stole from the family, and you decided that didn't matter. You decided to show mercy. He spat the last word like a curse. "I'm not a killer." The words came out before Victor could stop them. They hung in the air. Impossible. Absurd. Moretti stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "Not a killer? Victor, you've ended 23 lives for this organization. 23 men who disrespected the family, who broke our rules, who thought they could challenge our authority. You are a killer. That's all you are. That's all you've ever been. That's what I made you. Maybe I don't want to be that anymore." The 6 armed men raised their weapons. Revolvers and shotguns all pointed at Victor's chest, but Moretti raised his hand, stopping them. "You don't get to choose, Victor. None of us do. You think I chose this life? You think any of us did? We play the roles we're given, and your role is to be feared, to be the thing that keeps people in line, to be the monster." "I'm not a monster." "Yes, you are." Moretti's composure finally cracked. "Look at yourself. Look at yourself. You're a freak of nature. God made you wrong, Victor. He made you different, and I'm the only one who saw how to use that difference. I'm the one who gave you value. Without me, you're nothing. Without me, you're just a circus attraction. A sideshow. Something for people to gawk at and mock." The words hit harder than any punch, because Victor knew they were true. Without Moretti, where would he go? What would he do? Who would accept a 2.10-meter albino with a reputation as a killer? Moretti saw the doubt in Victor's eyes and pressed his advantage. "I'm going to give you one more chance. Tomorrow night there's another job. A traitor who's been talking to the FBI. His name is Thomas Murphy. Irish, stubborn, stupid, and he's got to go. You're going to handle it personally. And this time, Victor, you're going to do it right. You're going to remember who you are and what you owe me." Moretti turned to leave, then paused at the door. "And Victor, if you disobey me again, I won't kill you. I'll throw you out on the street. Let the world see what you really are, a freak with nowhere to go and no one to protect him. Think about that." The door slammed shut. The warehouse fell silent except for the rain hammering on the roof. Victor sat back down on his crate. His hands were shaking again. The cat had disappeared, frightened by the shouting, by the guns. He picked up his book, but he couldn't focus on the words. All he could see was Moretti's face. All he could hear was that voice. "That's what I made you." But what if Moretti hadn't made him? What if Victor had existed before the Mafia, before the killing, before the legend of the White Death? What if somewhere, buried beneath 3 years of violence and fear, there was a different person, a better person? Outside, the rain continued to fall on Chicago, washing the blood from the streets but never quite making them clean. And in the corner of a forgotten warehouse, a giant who was tired of being a monster made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow night, when they sent him to eliminate Thomas Murphy, Victor Kraus would discover the truth, and the truth would set him free. Or destroy him completely. Chicago, Illinois, October 1935. The next evening, the sun had set over Chicago like a bleeding wound, painting the sky in shades of crimson and purple before surrendering to the darkness. Victor Kraus stood at the broken window of the warehouse, watching the city transform from daylight respectability into its true nocturnal self, a hunting ground where predators wore expensive suits and their prey wore desperation like a second skin. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Castellano's face, heard the man's pleading, felt the pulse beneath his fingers, that fragile rhythm of life that he'd held in his hands and, for the first time, chosen not to extinguish. The choice terrified him more than any violence ever had. Behind him, the warehouse door creaked open. Victor didn't turn. He knew the footsteps, heavy, confident, accompanied by the jingle of keys and the rustle of expensive fabric. "Evening, big man." It was Knuckles Romano again, but this time his voice carried a different tone. Not quite respect, but something close to caution. "Boss wants you ready by 8. We're picking up Murphy at his apartment in Bridgeport. Simple job, in and out." Victor finally turned. In the fading light, his pale skin seemed almost translucent, his red-tinted eyes catching the last rays of sun like a wolf's in the darkness. "What did Moretti tell you about last night?" Knuckles shifted uncomfortably. "Said you had a moment of weakness. Said it won't happen again." He paused, then added quietly, "Look, Victor, I don't know what's going on in that head of yours, but whatever it is, you gotta snap out of it. The boss ain't a forgiving man. You get one mistake. Maybe you don't get two. Castellano had children. Yeah, and Murphy's got a kid too. A little girl. So what?" Knuckles pulled out a cigarette, lit it, exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. We all got people we care about. That's what makes the world go round. But this life, our life, it don't leave room for sentiment. You know that, do I? The question hung between them, strange and unexpected. Knuckles studied Victor's face, searching for something he couldn't quite name. You feeling okay? You sick or something? I'm fine. You don't look fine. You look like a man who's thinking too much. And thinking too much in this business gets you planted in the ground. Knuckles dropped his cigarette, crushed it under his heel. 8 o'clock, don't be late. And Victor, whatever happened last night, leave it there. Tonight, you do the job. Clean, professional, the way you always do. After Knuckles left, Victor remained standing at the window. The city sprawled before him, a million lives intersecting, colliding, burning out like matches struck in the dark. How many of those lives had he touched? How many had he ended? 23, Moretti had said. 23 souls extinguished because Victor Krause had been told they deserved to disappear. But who had decided that? And why had Victor never questioned it before? The briefing, 7:45 p.m. The black Cadillac pulled up outside the warehouse precisely at 8 o'clock. This time there were 5 men: Knuckles, Johnny Terranova, Mickey Sullivan, and 2 others Victor recognized as Moretti's personal guards, Big Eddie Falcone and Scarface Pete Lombardi. The presence of Moretti's top enforcers sent a clear message. This wasn't just another job. This was a test. Victor climbed into the back of the car, his massive frame filling the entire rear seat. Big Eddie sat beside him, a Thompson submachine gun resting casually across his lap. Insurance, in case Victor's moment of weakness turned into full-blown rebellion. Here's how it goes, Knuckles said from the front passenger seat, unfolding a map of Chicago. Thomas Murphy lives on 35th and Morgan, 3rd floor apartment, back entrance through the alley. He's expecting trouble, been carrying a piece, keeping irregular hours, but he's got a routine. Every night at 9, he puts his kid to bed. That's when we hit him. His daughter will be there? Victor's voice was quiet, but it cut through the cigarette smoke and engine noise like a blade. She's 8 years old, Johnny Terranova offered, glancing nervously in the rearview mirror. Name's Emma. Kid don't know nothing. She ain't the target, but she'll be there. She'll be asleep, Knuckles snapped. And she'll stay asleep if you do your job quick. You go in, you handle Murphy, you walk out. The kid wakes up in the morning, finds her old man gone. Sad story. Tragic even, but that ain't our problem. Victor stared out the window. The streets rolled by, working-class neighborhoods where people lived paycheck to paycheck, where fathers came home exhausted from factory shifts, where mothers stretched every dollar until it screamed. Thomas Murphy was one of those fathers, a dock worker who'd gotten mixed up with the wrong people, who'd seen something he shouldn't have, who'd made the fatal mistake of talking to federal agents. In Moretti's world, that was an unforgivable sin. Traitors didn't get trials, they got Victor Krause. Why is Murphy talking to the FBI? Victor asked suddenly. The car went silent. Even the engine seemed to quiet. What? Knuckles turned around, his face a mask of confusion and irritation. Why is Thomas Murphy talking to federal agents? What did he see? What does he know? Who cares? Scarface Pete growled. He's a rat. That's all that matters. I want to know. Big Eddie shifted the Thompson slightly, not quite pointing it at Victor, but making its presence known. You don't ask questions, freak. You do what you're told. Victor's head turned slowly toward Big Eddie. For 3 years, these men had worked alongside him, had witnessed what he could do, had built their reputations on proximity to his legend, but they'd always maintained that crucial distance. The distance between the handler and the weapon, the master and the tool. Now, looking into Victor's eyes, Big Eddie saw something that made his finger twitch toward the trigger. He saw a man waking up, and a man awake was far more dangerous than a monster asleep. Murphy saw a hit, Knuckles said quickly, trying to diffuse the tension. 3 months ago, down at the docks, Moretti's boys took out a rival's lieutenant. Murphy was working the night shift, saw the whole thing, kept his mouth shut at first, but then the feds started sniffing around, offering him protection, immunity, relocation. Stupid Mick got greedy, thought he could make a deal and disappear. So he's not a thief, not a challenger, just a witness. A witness who's gonna put 5 of our guys in prison. Johnny's voice cracked with frustration. You don't get it, Victor. This ain't about right or wrong. This is about survival. The organization survives, or we all go down. Victor said nothing, but something in his silence made all 5 men uncomfortable. Bridgeport, 8:47 p.m. The Murphy apartment building was identical to 1,000 others in Chicago's working-class neighborhoods. Red brick, stained black with soot, fire escapes zigzagging up the facade like iron scars, windows glowing with the weak yellow light of cheap electricity. The alley behind the building was narrow, filled with garbage cans and the smell of rotting food. They parked 2 blocks away. Knuckles checked his watch. 9 o'clock and 13 minutes. Victor, you go in alone. We stay here as backup. You got 10 minutes to get in, handle Murphy, and get out. Any longer than that, neighbors start asking questions. Victor stepped out of the car. The October air was cold, carrying the promise of an early winter. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew, a lonely sound that echoed through the city like a cry for help that would never be answered. Victor, Knuckles leaned out the window. I meant what I said earlier. Whatever's going on with you, leave it here. Do the job. Save yourself. Victor nodded slowly. Then he walked toward the alley, his footsteps echoing in the darkness, each step carrying him closer to a moment that would define the rest of his life. The Murphy apartment, 8:56 p.m. The back door to the building had a lock that Mickey Sullivan could pick in under 30 seconds. Victor had watched him do it 100 times. But tonight, Victor didn't need Mickey. The door was already unlocked. Murphy had left it open, a small act of defiance or perhaps resignation. A man who knew death was coming and had decided not to make it inconvenient. The stairwell was dark, lit by a single bulb that flickered like a dying heartbeat. Victor climbed slowly, his hand trailing along the wall, feeling the texture of peeling paint and decades of accumulated grime. He could hear life behind the doors he passed, arguments, laughter, a radio playing swing music, a baby crying. Normal life. The life he'd never had and never would. Third floor, apartment 3B. The door was thin, cheap wood that wouldn't stop a determined kick. Victor stood outside, listening. Inside, he could hear voices. A man's voice, tired, rough, speaking softly, and a child's voice. Hi, bright, innocent. Tell me the story about the princess again, Daddy. Emma, honey, you've heard that story 100 times, but I like it when you tell it, please. A pause. Then Murphy's voice, softer now, filled with a love so profound it made Victor's chest ache. All right, once upon a time there was a princess who lived in a castle made of starlight. Victor's hand was on the doorknob. All he had to do was turn it, step inside, and end Thomas Murphy's life. 10 seconds of work, maybe less. The girl would scream yes, but she'd be alive. Traumatized, destroyed, but alive. Was that mercy, or was it just a different kind of cruelty? His hand didn't move. That's what I made you. Moretti's words echoed in his mind, but beneath them, deeper, older, came another voice, that fragment of memory from last night. The kind face, the gentle voice. You're safe now. You're safe with us. Who had said that, and why had Victor forgotten? The door opened suddenly, and Victor found himself face to face with Thomas Murphy. The confrontation, 9:03 p.m. Murphy was shorter than Victor by almost half a meter, but he didn't back down. He stood in the doorway, a revolver in his right hand, his left arm extended behind him as if to shield something precious. His face was weathered, lined with the kind of exhaustion that comes from too many double shifts and too much fear. But his eyes were clear, determined. I knew you'd come, Murphy said quietly. Didn't think it'd be you, though. Thought they'd send someone I could fight. Victor stared down at him, saying nothing. Behind Murphy in the small living room, he could see a little girl sitting on a worn couch, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Emma, 8 years old, brown hair and pigtails, wide eyes that showed confusion but not yet fear. She looked at Victor and her mouth fell open. Daddy, who's that man? Why is he so tall? Why does he look like that? Emma, honey, go to your room. Murphy's voice remained steady, but Victor could hear the terror beneath it. Right now. Don't come out until I tell you. But Daddy, now Emma. The girl scrambled off the couch and ran toward a door at the far end of the apartment. She cast one more glance over her shoulder at Victor, not frightened, but curious the way children look at things they don't understand, and then disappeared behind the door. Murphy raised the revolver, pointing it at Victor's chest. His hand was shaking, but his finger was on the trigger. I ain't going down without a fight. You tell Moretti that. You tell him Thomas Murphy ain't no coward. I'm not here to tell Moretti anything. Murphy blinked, confusion breaking through his fear. What? Put the weapon down. Are you insane? You're here to end me. Everyone knows what you do. You're the White Death. You're Moretti's. I'm tired. Victor's voice was so quiet Murphy had to lean forward to hear it. I'm tired of being what they made me. I'm tired of taking fathers from their daughters. Murphy's gun hand lowered slightly. Is this some kind of trick? No trick. I'm giving you a chance. Take your daughter and leave Chicago. Tonight. Right now. Don't pack. Don't say goodbye to anyone. Just go. They'll find me. Moretti's got connections everywhere. Maybe, but maybe not. The world is bigger than Chicago. Bigger than the Mafia. Take Emma and disappear. Give her a chance at a life that doesn't end with men like me standing at your door. Murphy's eyes filled with tears. Not from fear now, but from something else. Hope. Desperate, fragile, hope. Why? Why would you help me? Victor thought about that question. Why? Because he'd seen Castellanos' face and remembered something human inside himself. Because he'd heard Emma asking for a bedtime story and realized that innocent voices shouldn't have to scream. Because for 3 years he'd been a weapon, and weapons don't ask questions, don't feel guilt, don't dream of being something different. Because I don't want to be a monster anymore. The words hung in the air between them, a confession and a prayer. Murphy lowered his gun completely. If I run, they'll know you let me go. They'll come after you. I know. They'll destroy you. Maybe I deserve it. No. Murphy stepped forward, and Victor instinctively tensed, but the man wasn't attacking. He was reaching out, placing one calloused hand on Victor's arm. No, you don't. Whatever you've done, whatever you've been, this moment right here, this is who you really are. This is the truth underneath all that fear they built around you. Victor looked down at Murphy's hand. It was the first time in 3 years anyone had touched him without flinching, without hatred or terror in their eyes. The gesture was so simple, so human, that Victor felt something crack inside his chest, not breaking, but opening. A door he'd kept locked swinging wide. Go, Victor said, before I change my mind, before they realize something's wrong. Murphy nodded. He turned toward Emma's room, then paused. What's your real name? Not the one they call you. Your real name. Victor. Victor Krause. Thank you, Victor Krause. My daughter will grow up because of you. That's not nothing. That's everything. Murphy disappeared into the bedroom. Victor could hear urgent whispers, the sounds of hasty preparation. He walked to the window and looked down at the alley. The Cadillac was still there, 5 men waiting, wondering why this was taking so long. Victor had maybe 3 minutes before they came up to investigate. Behind him, Murphy emerged with Emma in his arms. The girl was wrapped in a blanket, the stuffed rabbit clutched in her small hands. She looked at Victor over her father's shoulder, and this time there was no fear in her eyes, only wonder. "Are you an angel?" she asked suddenly. Victor almost laughed, a sound so foreign it hurt his throat. "No, I'm not an angel, but you have white hair like the angels in my picture book, and you're big and strong like them, and you're helping Daddy." Murphy carried her toward the door, then stopped one more time. "There's a train station 2 blocks north. There's a freight train leaving for St. Louis at 9:30. If we run, we can make it." Then run. They ran. Victor watched from the window as 2 figures, one carrying the other, emerged from the building and sprinted down the alley in the opposite direction from the Cadillac. In the darkness, they looked like shadows, like ghosts escaping from a haunted house. Then they were gone. The reckoning. 9:17 p.m. Victor descended the stairs slowly, each step carrying him toward consequences he couldn't avoid and didn't want to. When he emerged from the building, all 5 men were waiting in the alley, weapons drawn. "Well?" Knuckles demanded. "Is it done?" Victor looked at them. These men who'd worked alongside him, who'd built their careers on proximity to his violence, who'd never once questioned what they were, or what they'd become. "Murphy's gone." The words detonated like a grenade. "Gone?" Scarface Pete stepped forward, his face twisting with rage. "What do you mean gone?" "Gone where?" "Away. With his daughter. I let them leave." For 3 full seconds, no one moved. Then Big Eddie raised the Thompson, pointing it directly at Victor's chest. "You stupid freak! You just signed your own death warrant." "I know." Knuckles pushed Eddie's gun down. "Wait. Just wait." He turned to Victor, and for the first time there was something like pity in his eyes. "Victor, what the hell are you doing? You know what Moretti will do when he finds out. You know how this ends." "I know." "Then why? Why throw everything away for some dock worker and his kid?" Victor thought about Emma's face, about her question. "Are you an angel?" No, he wasn't an angel, but maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to be a demon either, because they told me I was a monster. But monsters don't hesitate, monsters don't feel guilt, monsters don't lie awake at night seeing the faces of the people they've destroyed. So maybe I'm not a monster, maybe I never was. Johnny Terranova made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "You're dead, man, you know that, right? You're already dead. Take me to Moretti." The warehouse. 10:38 p.m. They drove in silence. The Thompson stayed pointed at Victor the entire way, but he didn't resist. Didn't try to escape. Where would he go? A 210-meter albino with a reputation as a killer. He'd be hunted down in hours, maybe minutes. At least this way it would be quick. The warehouse was lit up like a stage when they arrived. 30 men, maybe more, filled the space, all armed, all watching as Victor was marched inside like a prisoner of war. In the center of the room, sitting in a leather chair that looked absurdly out of place among the industrial decay, was Salvatore Moretti. The boss didn't stand when Victor entered. He didn't shout. He didn't even look angry. He looked disappointed, sad even, as if Victor were a beloved pet that had bitten him and now had to be put down. "Knuckles tells me you let Thomas Murphy escape," Moretti said softly. "Is this true?" "Yes." "And his daughter?" "Yes." Moretti nodded slowly. "You understand what this means? What I have to do?" "Yes." 3 years, Victor. 3 years I protected you, fed you, gave you purpose, and this is how you repay that kindness. With betrayal." Victor finally spoke, his voice carrying across the warehouse to every man present. "You didn't give me purpose. You made me a weapon. There's a difference." "Is there?" Moretti stood, walking slowly toward Victor. Despite the size difference, despite the fact that Victor could snap him like a twig, the boss showed no fear. "You came to me broken, Victor, lost, alone, a freak that the world had thrown away. I gave you strength. I gave you respect. I gave you fear. Before me, you were nothing. After me, you were a legend. I don't want to be a legend. I want to be human." Moretti stopped 3 feet away. "That ship has sailed, my friend. You can't go back. You can't undo what you've done. 23 men are dead because of you. 23 families destroyed. You think showing mercy to one dock worker erases that? You think letting one little girl keep her father makes you a hero? No, it makes me someone trying to change." "Change?" Moretti laughed bitterly. "You can't change what you are. None of us can. We're what the world makes us, and the world made you a monster." "No." Victor's voice was stronger now, filled with a conviction he hadn't known he possessed. "You made me a monster, but I'm choosing to be something else." Moretti's eyes hardened. "And you've chosen death." He nodded to Big Eddie, who raised the Thompson. Victor didn't flinch, didn't beg, didn't try to fight. He stood there, tall and pale and strangely peaceful, ready to accept whatever came next. The warehouse door burst open. The intervention. 10:41 p.m. A woman ran in. No, not ran, but moved with the kind of desperate urgency that comes from seeing disaster unfold and knowing you have seconds to prevent it. She was young, maybe 25. With dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that blazed with intelligence and anger. "Stop," she shouted. "Don't shoot him." Every gun in the warehouse swiveled toward her. Moretti's face went from surprise to fury in an instant. "Who the hell are you? How did you get in here?" The woman didn't slow down. She pushed past Moretti's men, who seemed too shocked to stop her, and positioned herself between Victor and the guns. "My name is Sophia Romano. I work at the Speakeasy on Halstead. And I know what this man is. Then you know he's dead, Moretti growled. He's not a killer. Sophia's voice rang out clear and strong. Or at least he doesn't want to be one anymore. I've been watching him for months. I've seen him feed stray cats. I've seen him save food from his own meals to give to the homeless. I've seen him reading books by the window, crying over the stories. This man has a soul, Mr. Moretti, and you've been trying to destroy it. Moretti's face was a mask of rage. You're Knuckles' cousin, aren't you? Your family, and you dare come here and defend this traitor? I dare come here and defend a man who's trying to be better than what you made him. Victor stared at Sophia in shock. He'd seen her before. At the speakeasy, yes. She'd served him drinks on the rare occasions Moretti had sent him there on business, but he'd never spoken to her beyond basic pleasantries, had never imagined she'd even noticed him beyond the horror of his appearance. How did you know I was here? Victor asked quietly. Sophia turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I followed you tonight. I've been following you for weeks. I saw what you did at Castellano's apartment. I saw you spare that man's life, and tonight I saw you let Murphy and his daughter escape. I knew what Moretti would do when he found out, so I came to stop it. You can't stop this, Moretti said coldly. No one can. He betrayed the family. The punishment for betrayal is death. That's the law. That's how we survive. Then your law is wrong. Sophia spun back to face Moretti. Your law makes monsters out of men and calls it justice. Look at him, she pointed at Victor. Really look at him. You took a human being and turned him into a weapon because he looked different. Because he was alone, because he had no one to protect him. And now that he's trying to reclaim his humanity, you want to destroy him for it? What does that make you? The warehouse fell silent. 30 armed men, all watching, all waiting to see how their boss would respond to this impossible challenge. Moretti's hand moved toward his jacket. Victor knew what was there. A nickel-plated .38 revolver. Always loaded, always ready. You've said enough, girl. Get out of here before I forget your family. No, Sophia. I said no. Her voice cracked like thunder. You want to end him? You end me first. Because I'm not moving. And if you can pull that trigger while looking me in the eyes, then you're not the man my mother told me you were. You're not the man who used to give me candy when I was little and tell me I could be anything I wanted. You're just another killer in a city full of killers. Moretti's hand froze. His face went through a dozen emotions. Rage, frustration, pain, and finally something that looked almost like shame. You don't understand this world, Sophia. You don't understand what's necessary to survive. Maybe not, but I understand that mercy is stronger than fear, and I understand that this man, she gestured to Victor, deserves a chance to be more than what you made him. Long seconds passed. The only sound was the rain starting to fall outside, pattering against the warehouse roof like applause from a distant audience. Finally, Moretti lowered his hand. Get him out of my sight, he said quietly. Both of them. If I see Victor Krause in Chicago after tonight, he's dead. If he's within 100 miles of this city by sunrise, he's dead. And Sophia, his voice broke slightly. You're no longer family. You made your choice. Now live with it. He turned and walked away, his men parting like a sea before him. The leather chair, the guns, the entire empire of fear and violence. He left it all behind as he disappeared into the night. The escape. 11:16 p.m. Sophia drove an old Ford pickup truck that rattled and wheezed like a dying animal. Victor sat in the passenger seat, his head nearly touching the roof, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Why? He asked finally. Why did you risk your life for me? Sophia kept her eyes on the road, navigating through rain-slicked streets toward the edge of the city. Because 3 months ago, my little brother got involved with some bad people, started running numbers for a crew in Cicero. When he tried to quit, they sent someone to teach him a lesson. You know who they sent? Victor felt his stomach drop. Me. You. The White Death. My brother was 17 years old. Barely more than a kid, and they sent you to scare him straight. Maybe worse. What happened? Sophia smiled. Sad, but genuine. You stood outside our apartment for 10 minutes. My brother was inside, terrified, crying, certain he was going to be unalived. And then you just left. You walked away. No violence, no threats, just walked away. Later, I found out you told Moretti's men that my brother had been handled, that he'd never cause problems again. You lied to protect a kid you didn't even know. I remember him, Victor said softly. He had kind eyes, reminded me of someone, I don't know who. That's when I knew you weren't what they said you were. That's when I started paying attention, started seeing the real Victor Krause underneath the legend of the White Death. They drove in silence for a while, leaving the city behind, heading toward the dark expanse of farmland and forest that stretched beyond Chicago's borders. Where will you go? Sophia asked. I don't know. Somewhere far. Somewhere no one knows my name. You can't run forever. No, but I can try. Sophia pulled the truck to the side of the road. In the distance, the lights of Chicago glowed against the clouds like a dying fire. She reached into her coat and pulled out an envelope. I've been saving money, working double shifts, skipping meals. $300. It's yours. Victor stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. I can't take that. You have to. You have nothing. No identification, no money, no friends. $300 might buy you enough time to disappear, to start over. Why would you do this for me? Sophia looked at him. Really looked at him, And Victor saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen in 3 years. Not fear, not pity, but simple, honest compassion, because everyone deserves a second chance. Even monsters who were never really monsters to begin with. Victor took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was more money than he'd ever possessed, more hope than he'd ever been allowed to feel. "Thank you," he whispered. "I don't know how to repay you. Be better. Live better. That's payment enough." Sophia drove him another 10 miles, then stopped at a crossroads where 3 highways met. "This is as far as I can take you. Pick a direction and don't look back." Victor climbed out of the truck. The rain had stopped, and above, through breaks in the clouds, stars were beginning to appear. He stood there for a moment, a giant in a world that had always been too small for him, and felt something he'd never felt before. Freedom. "Victor," Sophia called from the truck window. "What was your real name? Before all this? Before Moretti? Before you became the White Death?" Victor thought about that question, tried to remember, but there was only darkness, only fragments, only that voice from a half-forgotten past. "You're safe now. You're safe with us." "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't remember." "Then give yourself a new one. Become someone new. Leave Victor Krause and the White Death behind. Be whoever you want to be." The truck drove away, its taillights disappearing into the darkness like red eyes closing. Victor stood at the crossroads, 3 highways stretching into 3 different futures. Behind him lay Chicago, Moretti, 3 years of violence and nightmares. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, possibility. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the battered copy of Mice and Men. The pages were worn from countless readings, but the words still held power, still spoke of dreams and friendship and the terrible fragility of hope. Victor chose the highway heading west, toward open spaces, toward mountains and deserts and places where a man could disappear into the landscape like a ghost into fog. As he walked, his massive shadow stretching behind him in the moonlight, Victor Krause made himself a promise. Whatever came next, whatever trials, whatever dangers, whatever impossible obstacles, he would face them as himself, not as a weapon, not as a monster, but as a man trying against all odds to find redemption in a world that had never shown him mercy. The journey toward that redemption had only just begun, and the truth he would discover along the way would be rural Illinois, November 1935. 3 weeks later, the farmhouse stood alone against the winter sky like a forgotten prayer, its paint peeling, its roof sagging under the weight of too many storms and not enough care. Victor had found it abandoned 2 weeks ago, hidden at the end of a dirt road that led nowhere, surrounded by fields that had gone to seed, and forests that pressed close like curious strangers. It wasn't much. The windows were cracked, the floorboards groaned with every step, and the wind found its way inside through a dozen invisible gaps. But it was shelter, it was solitude. It was the first place Victor had ever lived that didn't belong to someone else's nightmare. He'd used Sophia's money carefully, buying food from small-town general stores where people were too polite or too frightened to ask questions, trading cash for used clothing that actually fit his massive frame, purchasing a kerosene lamp and matches and the simple tools of survival. The $300 was dwindling, but Victor had learned to stretch every penny, to make poverty feel almost like abundance. In the evenings, he sat by the fireplace, one of the few things in the house that still worked, and read by lamplight. He'd found a box of old books in the farmhouse attic, water-damaged novels, outdated encyclopedias, a family Bible with names and dates written in fading ink. The Bible fascinated him most. Page after page of births and deaths, marriages and migrations, a complete history of the Morrison family who'd once called this place home. Jacob Morrison, born 1847, died 1923. Married to Sarah Fletcher, 1869. Children: Abraham, 1870. Rebecca, 1872. Thomas, 1875. A whole family, reduced to names and dates. Lives lived and lost, dreams pursued and abandoned, all condensed into a few lines of careful handwriting. Victor wondered if anyone remembered them now, if anyone visited their graves or spoke their names with love. Would anyone remember Victor Krause, or would he simply vanish like smoke, leaving nothing behind but ghost stories whispered in Chicago speakeasies? On this particular evening, the 21st day of his self-imposed exile, Victor made a decision that would change everything. He would search the farmhouse thoroughly, not for valuables or supplies, but for answers to a question that had been growing louder in his mind with each passing day. Who am I? Not Victor Krause, the weapon, not the White Death, the legend, but the person before all that. The child who'd existed before Moretti, before the orphanage, before the darkness swallowed his past whole. That morning a memory had surfaced, sharp and sudden as breaking glass. The memory. Dawn. Victor had been half asleep, caught in that strange space between dreaming and waking, when he heard it again. That voice, the one from fragments, from shadows. "Victor, can you hear me? Say your name, son. Tell me your name." Not Victor. Victor. One letter different, but it felt important, felt true. "Victor Anderson. My name is Victor Anderson." "Good boy." "That's right. Victor Anderson. And how old are you?" "I'm 7. I'm 7 years old. And where do you live, Victor? We live on Oak Street, number 42, in the blue house with the white shutters. Mama planted roses in the front yard. Red roses. They smell like the memory dissolved like sugar in water, leaving only sweetness and loss. Victor had jolted awake, his heart racing, his breath coming in gasps. Victor Anderson, Oak Street, a blue house with white shutters and red roses. These weren't fantasies. They were too specific. Too vivid. They were memories, real memories of a real life that someone had stolen from him. The attic. 6:47 p.m. The farmhouse attic was accessed through a trapdoor in the ceiling of the second-floor hallway. Victor had avoided it until now. The ladder looked fragile, and the space above was dark and cramped. But tonight, driven by that morning's memory and a growing desperation for truth, he climbed up. The ladder groaned, but held. The attic smelled of dust and mouse droppings and the particular mustiness of forgotten things. Victor had to crouch. Even here, even in this abandoned place, the world was too small for him. His lamp threw wild shadows across the rafters. Boxes were stacked against the walls, old furniture covered in sheets, trunks that hadn't been opened in decades. Victor began searching methodically, looking for anything that might connect to his past, to the name Victor Anderson, to the life he'd lost. Most boxes contained exactly what he expected. Old clothes, dishes wrapped in newspaper from 1918, Christmas ornaments that would never decorate another tree. But in the far corner, hidden beneath a moth-eaten quilt, he found something different. A leather satchel, cracked with age but still intact. Victor opened it with trembling hands. Inside were papers, documents, letters, photographs. But these didn't belong to the Morrison family. The names were wrong, the dates were wrong, and then he saw it. A photograph, black and white, edges yellowed with time. A family, a man and a woman, both smiling, both young and full of hope. And between them, held in the woman's arms, a baby, an infant with pale skin and hair so light it looked white even in the old photograph. Victor turned the photo over. On the back, in careful handwriting, Victor Anderson, 6 months old, with parents Lars and Ingrid, Chicago, 1909. The lamp nearly fell from Victor's hand. 1909, that would make him 26 years old now. The math aligned perfectly. But more than that, the baby in the photograph had the same distinctive features Victor saw every time he looked in a mirror. The pale skin, the white hair, the marks of albinism that had defined his entire existence. This was him. This was proof. Victor's hand shook as he dug deeper into the satchel. More photographs emerged. A small boy, maybe 3 or 4 years old, playing in a yard with a dog. The same boy, older now, standing beside a Christmas tree. A family portrait taken in a photography studio, the kind with painted backdrops of gardens and classical columns. And then, newspaper clippings. Victor's blood ran cold as he read the headlines. The Truth in Ink Chicago Tribune, March 15th, 1916. Tragic fire claims 2 lives in Andersonville neighborhood. A devastating fire swept through a residential building on Oak Street early this morning, claiming the lives of Lars Anderson, 38, and his wife Ingrid Anderson, 35. The couple, Norwegian immigrants who had lived in Chicago for nearly 2 decades, were reportedly trapped on the second floor when the blaze erupted around 2 a.m. Neighbors described hearing screams and seeing flames engulfing the structure within minutes. Authorities suspect arson, though no suspects have been identified. The couple's 7-year-old son, Victor, was not home at the time of the fire, having been staying with relatives in a neighboring district. The child is now under the care of social services. Victor read the article 3 times, each word burning itself into his memory like a brand. Arson. His parents hadn't died in an accident. They'd been targeted, eliminated, and he, 7-year-old Victor Anderson, had survived only because he hadn't been home. But the article said he'd been with relatives. Victor had no memory of relatives. His first clear memory was the orphanage, St. Michael's home for unwanted children, cold floors, harsh voices, other children who'd stared at him with fear and disgust. How had he gotten from relatives to St. Michael's? What had happened in between? Victor kept reading. Another clipping, dated 3 months later. Chicago Tribune, June 22nd, 1916. Orphan with rare condition draws crowds at Lincoln Park. A 7-year-old boy suffering from a rare medical condition known as albinism has become an unexpected attraction at Lincoln Park, where he is cared for by staff at St. Michael's Orphanage. The child, whose identity is being protected, draws dozens of curious onlookers daily who come to observe his unusual appearance. Dr. Harold Jameson of Chicago Medical College notes that albinism affects approximately 1 in 20,000 individuals and results in a complete lack of pigmentation in the skin, hair, and eyes. Victor felt sick. They displayed him, put him on show like a curiosity, a freak of nature. Even as a grieving child who'd just lost his parents, he'd been nothing more than a spectacle. The final clipping was the one that made Victor's world collapse entirely. Chicago Daily News, August 3rd, 1916. Prominent businessman takes interest in unusual orphan. Salvatore Moretti, owner of several successful establishments throughout Chicago's South Side, has reportedly taken a personal interest in the welfare of a young orphan at St. Michael's home. The boy, who suffers from albinism and has grown to an unusual height for his age, will be placed in a specialized care facility where his unique needs can be better addressed. Father Timothy O'Connor of St. Michael's praised Mr. Moretti's generosity, noting that it takes a special kind of compassion to see past physical differences and recognize the humanity in all God's children. Victor's hands crushed the newspaper clipping. Specialized care facility, that's what they'd called it. But it hadn't been a facility, it had been a warehouse, a prison, a training ground where a grieving 7-year-old had been systematically broken down and rebuilt as a weapon. Moretti hadn't saved him. Moretti had acquired him, like property, like a tool to be sharpened and used. But why? Why go through such elaborate steps? Why create a fake fire, eliminate his parents, orchestrate his placement in the orphanage, and then swoop in as a savior? Victor dug deeper into the satchel, praying for more answers. At the very bottom, he found a letter, unsealed, unfolded, written in a shaky hand on lined paper. The letter: "To whoever finds this, my name is Margaret Sullivan. I was a nurse at Chicago Memorial Hospital in 1909. I am writing this because I can no longer live with what I know, what I participated in, what I allowed to happen." In March of 1909, a Norwegian couple named Lars and Ingrid Andersen came to the hospital for the birth of their first child. The pregnancy had been difficult and Mrs. Andersen was in considerable distress. I assisted Dr. Robert Chen during the delivery. The baby was born healthy, but he had albinism, a rare condition that causes lack of pigmentation. The parents were overjoyed regardless. They named him Victor. They held him and wept with happiness despite his unusual appearance. 2 days after the birth, a man came to the hospital. He said his name was Salvatore Moretti, and he was looking for special children for a special purpose. He saw Victor through the nursery window and became fixated on him. He offered Dr. Chen $5,000, an enormous sum, for information about the family. Dr. Chen refused at first, but Mr. Moretti was persuasive. He said the child would be valuable, that his appearance would make him useful in ways normal children couldn't be. He said he would ensure the boy had opportunities no orphan could dream of. I don't know what happened next. I only know that 7 years later, Lars and Ingrid Andersen died in a fire ruled as arson. Their son disappeared into the system. And I saw Salvatore Moretti at a restaurant celebrating with associates, talking about his long-term investment finally paying off. I am dying now. Cancer has taken everything but my conscience, and my conscience demands I leave this record. If anyone finds this, if anyone cares, please know. Victor Andersen was stolen. His childhood was stolen. His family was murdered so he could be molded into something unnatural. I pray someone finds him. I pray someone tells him the truth. And I pray, though I don't deserve it, for forgiveness. Margaret Sullivan, November 1932. Victor read the letter until the words blurred. His hands were shaking so violently the paper rattled like leaves in a storm. Everything he'd believed about himself, that he'd been unwanted, forgotten, a freak that no one had loved, all of it was a lie. He'd been loved. He'd had parents who'd held him and wept with joy. He'd had a name, a home, a future, and Salvatore Moretti had taken it all away. Had watched him as an infant and decided he would be useful. Had waited 7 years. 7 years for Victor to grow, to develop, to become the right size and age to be broken and remade. The fire hadn't been random. It had been planned, calculated. His parents had been eliminated because they were obstacles to Moretti's long-term plan. And Victor, 7-year-old Victor Andersen, had been orphaned, traumatized, and isolated specifically so he could be transformed into the White Death. Moretti hadn't found a weapon. He'd created one, from childhood, from innocence, from a boy who'd never had a chance. Victor stood in the attic, his head bent beneath the low rafters, the lamp casting his shadow enormous against the walls. For the first time in 3 years, maybe for the first time since he was 7 years old, he felt something pure and focused, and absolutely clear. Rage, not the mindless violence he'd committed for Moretti, not the hollow brutality of following orders, but righteous anger. The fury of someone who'd discovered they'd been robbed of everything that mattered and fed lies about who they were supposed to be. The plan, 9:23 p.m. Victor descended from the attic with the satchel clutched in one massive hand. He spread the contents across the kitchen table. Photographs, newspaper clippings, Margaret Sullivan's confession, evidence. Proof. The truth laid bare in ink and paper. But proof of what exactly? That Moretti had been interested in him as an infant, that his parents had died in a suspicious fire, that a dying nurse had guilty feelings. None of it proved Moretti had ordered the fire. None of it proved the connection between the hospital visit in 1909 and the orphanage placement in 1916. A clever lawyer, and Moretti could afford the cleverest, would shred this evidence in minutes. Victor needed more. He needed direct connections. Documents that proved Moretti had paid for the fire, had orchestrated the orphanage placement, had specifically requested Victor be brought into his organization, and he knew exactly where those documents would be. Chicago. Moretti's office. The private files the boss kept locked in a safe that supposedly no one else could access. Victor had seen that safe dozens of times during his 3 years of service. A massive black iron box built into the wall behind a painting of Moretti's mother. Breaking into Moretti's office would be beyond dangerous. It would be suicidal. The entire building was guarded 24 hours a day, filled with armed men who'd gladly end Victor for the bounty Moretti had surely placed on his head. But Victor had advantages. He knew the building's layout, he knew the guards' routines, and most importantly, he knew that Moretti would never expect him to come back. The boss had banished him, threatened him with death if he returned to Chicago. The logical thing, the safe thing, would be to stay hidden, stay vanished, live out his days in anonymous obscurity. Victor Krause had spent 3 years doing the logical thing, the safe thing, the thing he was told to do. Victor Anderson was going to do something different. The return, November 28th, 1935. 1 week later, Chicago looked exactly the same and completely different. The buildings still stood tall and smoke-stained. The streets still crawled with desperate people and dangerous men. The speakeasies still pumped jazz into the cold night air. But Victor saw it all through new eyes, not as a weapon returning to its master, but as a man returning to reclaim his stolen life. He'd traveled back carefully, spending the last of Sophia's money on a bus ticket to the city outskirts, then walking the final miles under cover of darkness. He'd acquired different clothes, a long coat, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, a scarf wrapped around his face. It wasn't much of a disguise, but in the dark, from a distance, it might buy him the few seconds he needed. Moretti's office was in a 3-story building on Wabash Avenue, sandwiched between a pawn shop and a restaurant that served as a front for illegal gambling. The ground floor was a legitimate accounting firm, or as legitimate as anything Moretti touched could be. The second floor housed the real operations, bookkeeping for various illegal enterprises, meetings with lieutenants, planning for the organization's expansion. The third floor was Moretti's private sanctuary, his office, his files, his secrets. Victor waited in an alley across the street, watching the building for over an hour. Guards rotated every 30 minutes. 2 men at the front door, 1 at the back entrance, another on the second-floor balcony, all armed, all alert. But there was a gap, a brief window between 2 a.m. and 2:15 a.m. when the guards changed shifts and the building was vulnerable. Not unguarded, never unguarded, but less watched, less prepared. At 1:47 a.m., Victor made his move. The infiltration, 2:03 a.m. The back entrance was secured by a single guard, Tony Two Fingers DeLuca, a man Victor had worked alongside a dozen times. Tony was tough, but he wasn't smart. He smoked on duty, got distracted easily, had a weakness for whiskey he thought no one knew about. Victor approached from the blind side, moving with a silence that seemed impossible for someone his size. 3 years of working in shadows had taught him how to make his body disappear, despite its enormity. Tony never heard him coming. Victor's hand clamped over the guard's mouth, the other arm wrapping around his torso, lifting him clean off the ground. Tony struggled, tried to reach for his weapon, but Victor was too strong, too fast. "I don't want to hurt you," Victor whispered into Tony's ear. "Nod if you understand." Tony nodded frantically, eyes wide with terror. "I'm going inside. I'll be gone in 10 minutes. You're going to stay quiet. You're going to tell everyone you saw nothing, because if you raise an alarm, I'll come back, and next time I won't be gentle. Nod if you understand." Tony nodded again. Victor set him down carefully, then struck a precise blow to the base of the skull that would leave Tony unconscious but unharmed for about 30 minutes. Enough time for Victor to get in, find what he needed, and disappear. The back door was locked, but Victor had watched Tony unlock it 100 times. He knew where the spare key was hidden, in a false brick in the wall beside the doorframe. 30 seconds later, he was inside. The building was dark, quiet, filled with the smell of cigarette smoke and old coffee. Victor moved through the ground floor like a ghost, avoiding the few areas where lamplight still glowed from offices where late-night workers crunched numbers for criminal enterprises. The stairs to the third floor creaked under his weight. Victor winced with each step, but no alarms rang out, no doors burst open. The building remained silent, unaware of the intruder walking through its heart. Moretti's office door was locked with a heavy deadbolt. Victor examined it carefully. This wasn't something he could pick. This required force. One massive shoulder drove into the door. Wood splintered, metal shrieked. The door burst open and Victor was inside. The safe. 2:11 a.m. Moretti's office was exactly as Victor remembered. Expensive furniture, thick carpet, walls lined with photographs of the boss shaking hands with politicians and judges and other criminals pretending to be legitimate. Behind the mahogany desk hung a large painting of Moretti's mother, her stern face watching over her son's criminal empire. Victor moved to the painting and lifted it carefully from the wall. Behind it, built into the concrete, was the safe, black iron, combination lock, impenetrable to most people. But Victor wasn't most people. He'd watched Moretti open this safe more than once during his 3 years of service, had observed from the corner of the room while pretending not to pay attention, while being dismissed as too stupid to understand or care about the boss's private business. But Victor had always been smarter than they thought. He'd memorized the combination, not out of any plan to betray Moretti, but simply because his mind held onto details, numbers, patterns, small things that others overlooked. His massive fingers worked the dial. Right 27, left 15, right 38, left 4. The safe clicked open. Inside were stacks of cash, tens of thousands of dollars in small bills, a collection of jewelry, probably taken as payment for debts, stored for later liquidation, several handguns, ledgers recording every illegal transaction the organization had conducted in the past decade, and at the very bottom, a manila folder with a label written in Moretti's own handwriting, Project Ghost, Confidential. Victor pulled out the folder with trembling hands. Inside were documents that confirmed his darkest suspicions and revealed horrors he hadn't even imagined. The documents, the first page was a contract, dated March 1909, agreement between Salvatore Moretti and Dr. Robert Chen, payment of $5,000 in exchange for detailed family information regarding the Anderson infant, albino, male, born March 12, 1909. Information to include home address, family financial situation, father's employment, mother's relatives, social connections, vulnerabilities. Dr. Chen had sold them out, had taken Moretti's money, and provided a complete dossier on Victor's family, making them targets. The second document was even worse. A receipt dated February 1916. Payment to James Torch Murphy, $2,000 for completion of Oak Street project. Targets eliminated as requested. Fire ruled arson. No suspects identified. Client satisfied. Moretti had paid for the fire, had hired someone to eliminate Lars and Ingrid Anderson, had orphaned 7-year-old Victor specifically so he could be acquired. More documents followed. Payments to St. Michael's Orphanage to ensure Victor was properly displayed to generate curiosity. Bribes to newspaper reporters to write articles about the unusual orphan. Donations to the orphanage board with specific instructions that Victor be made available for private adoption by qualified benefactors. Every step had been planned. Every tragedy had been orchestrated. Victor's entire life had been a carefully constructed nightmare designed to produce one result, a weapon in human form. But the final document in the folder was what made Victor's blood run cold. It was a list, names, dates, physical descriptions, 15 names in total, and beside each name a notation. Peter Kowalski, albino, large build, deceased, pneumonia, 1918. Anna Lindstrom, albino, female, unsuitable, too small. Michael Russo, albino, 6 feet tall, acquired 1920, deceased, training accident, 1923. The list went on. 15 individuals, 15 people with albinism whom Moretti had tracked, evaluated, and either acquired or dismissed as unsuitable for his purposes. Victor hadn't been the first. He'd been the one who survived, the one who'd grown tall enough, strong enough, and, God help him, had been traumatized enough to be molded into exactly what Moretti needed. At the bottom of the list, in Moretti's handwriting, Project Ghost successful. B. Anderson optimal specimen. Brothers disposed of as planned. Sister institutionalized. May prove useful for future leverage if needed. Victor read that line 3 times, his mind refusing to process the words. Brothers, sister. He had siblings. Or he'd had brothers who'd been disposed of, and a sister who was alive. Institutionalized somewhere, kept as leverage in case Victor ever stepped out of line. He wasn't alone. He'd never been alone. Moretti had known all along and had hidden the truth, had eliminated or controlled every family connection Victor might have discovered. Victor's hands crushed the folder. Every terrible thing he'd believed about himself, that he was alone, unwanted, a freak with no past and no future. All of it had been a lie, a deliberately constructed lie designed to keep him isolated, obedient, and lethal. Behind him, the office door creaked open. Hello, Victor. The confrontation. 2:19 a.m. Salvatore Moretti stood in the doorway, flanked by 6 armed men. He wasn't pointing a weapon, wasn't shouting. He looked almost sad, like a father disappointed by a wayward son. I knew you'd come back, Moretti said quietly. Sophia tried to save you, sent you away, but I knew. You can't run from what you are. You can't escape the truth. Victor slowly stood, the folder still clutched in his hands. He was taller than everyone in the room by half a meter, stronger than all of them combined, but he was outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped. The truth, Victor said, his voice steady despite the rage burning in his chest. You want to talk about truth? I found the truth. I found everything. The fire, the orphanage, the 15 others you tried to turn into weapons before you finally broke me. Moretti's expression didn't change. You were never broken, Victor. You were perfected. You were exactly what you were meant to be. I was a child. I was 7 years old. You took my parents. You took my brothers. You locked my sister away like an animal. I gave you purpose. For the first time, Moretti's calm cracked. You think your life was going to be better with them? You think a Norwegian immigrant family living living in poverty was going to give you opportunities. You think the world was going to accept you looking the way you do? I saved you from a life of mockery and suffering. I made you powerful. I made you feared. I made you matter. You made me a monster. No. Moretti stepped into the room and his guards followed. I revealed what you already were. From the moment you were born different, the world decided what you'd be. I just had the vision to use it, to make it profitable, to turn a genetic accident into something magnificent. Victor looked at the folder in his hands, at the names of the dead, at the note about his sister. Where is she? Where's my sister? Safe, cared for, alive, which is more than she'd be if I hadn't intervened. The girl had the same condition as you, same pale skin, same unusual appearance. Do you think she'd have survived in an orphanage? Do you think anyone would have adopted her? I put her somewhere clean, somewhere secure, somewhere she can't interfere with your work. She's my family. I'm your family. Moretti's voice echoed through the office. I raised you, I fed you, I taught you everything you know. You have no family but the organization. You have no purpose but what I gave you. Victor took a step forward, and every guard in the room tensed, weapons rising. But Victor wasn't attacking. He was standing tall. Victor Anderson, not Victor Krauss, was finally standing up for himself. You're right about one thing, Victor said quietly. You revealed what I was, but you were wrong about what that is. I'm not a monster. I'm not a weapon. I'm a man who's been lied to his entire life, and that ends now. Does it? Moretti smiled. Cold. Calculating. You're going to do what exactly? Expose me? With what evidence? That folder you're holding? It'll never see the inside of a courtroom. You're a wanted man, Victor. The law wants you for 23 homicides, and my lawyers will bury any accusations before they reach a judge. Maybe, but I'm not going to the police. Then what are you going to do? Victor looked at the folder one more time. Then he looked at Moretti. I'm going to find my sister. I'm going to free her from whatever prison you've locked her in, and then I'm going to tell her the truth about our family, about what you did, about what we lost. She won't believe you. She doesn't even know you exist, and I'll prove it. Victor held up the folder. I have the evidence, I have the truth, and I have time. You can send men after me. You can hunt me across the country, but you'll never catch me because I'm not running anymore. I'm fighting back. For the first time in 3 years, Victor saw something in Moretti's eyes he'd never seen before. Uncertainty. If you leave with that folder, Moretti said slowly, I'll consider it an act of war. Every resource I have will be devoted to finding you and eliminating you. You'll never know peace. You'll never know safety. Is that what you want? What I want, Victor said, is my life back. He turned toward the window. 3 stories up, concrete below. But better to risk the fall than stay trapped in this room with the man who destroyed everything. Moretti must have seen the intention in Victor's eyes because he suddenly shouted, Stop him! The guards opened fire. The escape. 2:23 a.m. Victor dove through the window as bullets tore through the air where he'd been standing. Glass exploded around him in 1,000 glittering fragments. The night air rushed past as he fell. 3 stories, 30 feet. Enough to break bones or worse. He hit the alley pavement hard, rolling to absorb the impact. Pain shot through his shoulder, his ribs, his left leg, but nothing broke. His size, his strength, his unusual bone structure, all the things that made him different had also made him resilient. Victor pushed himself to his feet, the folder still clutched in one hand, and ran. Behind him, Moretti's voice echoed into the night. Find him! I want him alive! I want him to watch while I burn that folder and everything he thinks he knows. But Victor was already gone, disappearing into the maze of Chicago alleys he knew so well, leaving only the sound of running footsteps and the whisper of a name he'd almost forgotten. Victor Anderson, the boy who'd been stolen, the man who would reclaim his life. Illinois State Asylum. December 1935. The asylum stood like a monument to forgotten souls, its gray walls rising against the winter sky. Victor had spent 2 weeks tracking down his sister through the documents in Moretti's folder. Her name was Anna Anderson. She was 23 years old, and she'd been locked away since childhood, told she had no family, that she was alone in the world. Victor stood outside the gates at dawn, the folder tucked inside his coat. Sophia had found him 3 days ago. She'd been searching for him since he'd returned to Chicago. Now she stood beside him, her hand resting on his arm. Are you ready? She asked quietly. I don't know if I'll ever be ready, but I have to do this. They'd planned carefully. Sophia had connections, a nurse inside the asylum who owed her a favor, who'd agreed to help them. No violence, no breaking down doors, just the truth, delivered gently to a woman who deserved to know she wasn't alone. The reunion, 9:47. Anna Anderson sat in the common room, reading by the window. She looked so much like Victor it took his breath away. Pale skin, white hair, those same unusual eyes. But where Victor had grown to monstrous height, Anna was small, delicate, her appearance ethereal rather than frightening. When she looked up and saw him, she didn't scream. She simply stared, recognition flickering in her eyes despite never having met him. I know you, she whispered. I've seen you in dreams. Who are you? Victor knelt beside her chair, making himself smaller. less imposing. "My name is Victor Anderson, and I'm your brother." Tears filled Anna's eyes. "I was told I had no family. They said I was alone." They lied. Victor opened the folder, showing her the photographs, the documents, the proof of their stolen childhood. "We had parents, we had brothers, and we had each other. Someone took that from us, but I'm here now, and I'm going to take you home." The exchange, 2:15 p.m. Leaving the asylum was easier than Victor expected. Sophia's nurse friend had processed the discharge papers. Anna was being released to family care. Legitimate, legal. Even Moretti couldn't stop it without revealing his own involvement. But Victor knew Moretti wouldn't let this end peacefully. The boss had too much to lose, too many secrets exposed. As they walked Anna to Sophia's truck, Victor saw them, 3 cars, parked down the road. Moretti's men waiting. "Get Anna out of here," Victor told Sophia. "Drive to the farmhouse. I'll meet you there." "Victor, no." "Go." Sophia drove away, Anna's pale face visible through the back window as Victor turned to face Moretti's men alone. The final stand, 2:34 p.m. 6 men emerged from the cars, led by Knuckles Romano. They were armed, but their weapons remained holstered. This wasn't an execution. This was a negotiation. "Moretti wants the folder," Knuckles said. "Give it to us and we let you walk away." "Keep it, and this gets ugly." Victor reached inside his coat, not for the folder but for something else. An envelope. Inside were copies of every document, already mailed to 3 different newspapers and a federal prosecutor Sophia knew. Insurance. "Tell Moretti the truth is already out. It's over." Knuckles' face went pale. "You don't know what you've done? The boss will face justice, or he'll run. Either way, I'm done being his weapon." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Knuckles nodded slowly. "You know what? Good for you, big man. Good for you." He turned and walked back to the cars. The others followed. No violence. No final confrontation. Just 6 men who'd seen enough death and finally recognized when to walk away. The farmhouse. 3 days later, Victor sat on the porch of the farmhouse watching Anna feed the stray cat that had returned. Sophia was inside, cooking dinner, humming softly. The Chicago newspapers had exploded with stories about Moretti's crimes. Federal agents were raiding his properties. The empire was crumbling. Anna sat beside Victor, her small hand finding his massive one. "What happens now?" she asked. "We start over. We remember our parents. We build a life they'd be proud of. Will it be hard? Probably, but we'll do it together." Sophia emerged from the house, carrying plates of simple food. They ate together as the sun set. 3 people who'd been broken by violence and lies, now healing through truth and family. Victor looked at his sister, at Sophia, at the quiet peace of the farmhouse. He'd been called a monster for so long he'd almost believed it. But monsters don't feel guilt. Monsters don't choose mercy. Monsters don't fight for redemption. He wasn't the White Death anymore. He was Victor Anderson, brother, friend, survivor. And finally, after 26 years of darkness, he was free.